For all the listeners out there, I want to start with, is fasting beneficial for women?
Great question. I love that you just start with the topic.
Just get into it.
Yeah, let's get into it. So, fasting for women is a topic that needs more research. That's honestly like the short answer. Now, there's a much longer answer that kind of goes into some of the nitty gritty, and I think an important question to kind of come back at you with is at what time of life, right? Because women are different depending at what phase of their life we're talking about, whether they're in the reproductive phase. Here we might be worried about at what time in your cycle are you fasting and what is best for you based off of how your hormones are changing across the month. Now, then we might ask ourselves, okay, somebody's entering perimenopause. There's changes, there's a decline in estrogen. What are we worried about here? And is this a good time to fast? And then we might ask ourselves, okay, now we've entered into menopause. What has changed now? And how might we adapt again? And so that's, I think, something that just high level, no matter whenever we're asking about women's health, we should always qualify about what we're specifically looking for. Now, regardless of phase of life, fasting, and regardless of man or woman, by the way, fasting is a stress to the body. And this is where any physician that is hesitant about fasting they're usually pointing to the fact that fasting will induce stress in the body. And I noticed that especially for women's health, this is really especially scary for some people because our body needs energy to get through, especially our reproductive phase, or when we're entering into perimenopause, we're worried about muscle protection, and there's these things that need nutrients and energy to support our health. And so I come back to that with a couple of things. One, that if you are worried about the stress induced by fasting, then you should probably consider a couple of things, being one, maybe reduce the amount of time that you are fasting. Make it less stressful by doing it for less time. So maybe instead of going for 16 or 18 hours every day, you go for 14 or even 12 hours a day of fasting. Another thing to keep in mind is instead of doing every single day fasting, where you're doing more significant stress on your body every single day, maybe instead consider longer fasts that are really, really impactful, but only a few times a year. And then the last thing that I would say is consider doing fasting mimicking, where you add nutrition and food to your fast that will reduce, again, the stress and safety concerns with water only fasting. And again, ideally do that only a few times a year. So that, applies to women's health, absolutely. And some of the fears that I think are around fasting for women, but even for our male listeners out there, this still applies. And I'll tap on one final thing, which is when we talk about that perimenopause piece for women and the fear around muscle loss or impacting hormonal health and things like that. What we see is that fasting and fasting mimicking especially has been muscle protective, especially fasting mimicking. And that's because not only does fasting actually increase growth hormone, which protects our muscle, but fasting mimicking adds nutrition, which allows our body to go to the food that we're eating for energy instead of trying to tap into our muscle stores for protein instead. And so that is really, really important for our women entering into perimenopause, where muscle loss is becoming more rapid. So that's just scratching the surface, honestly. I mean, I could go and talk about all the other things that are changing during perimenopause, and but we would be sitting here for days. So.
Well, I might just have to take you up on that, but Real quick, you mentioned fasting mimicking diet. And so you actually, I think you're the first person I've heard that from. So my understanding of fasting is essentially like zero to little consumption of any calories. I've heard, obviously like 5 calories from a cup of coffee or whatever is not going to pull you out of a fast necessarily. But how can we have a diet where we're consuming calories and nutrition, but yet still kind of mimic a fast? How does that work?
Yeah, great question. And let's come back to that coffee piece later, because I think that that's a fun one too. But yeah, fasting mimicking is the ability to get the benefits of water only fasting with food. How can you do it when the definition of fasting is no food? Well, there's about now nearly 30 years of research looking into what the real definition of fasting is. Yeah, sure, our dictionary definition of fasting is zero food consumption, but does our body, do our cells, do they read that same dictionary? Is that really what they're following to determine whether or not they're in a fasted state? And this research over the last few decades has really come to find that that is really way too high level. At the root, our cells are looking for specific nutrients in specific amounts that are high enough to tell it to switch from fasted to non-fasted or from repair to growth mode. And so it turns out you can actually have a little bit of very specific types of nutrients and still live below the radar. And that's kind of the way that I like to think of it. I like to think that our cells essentially have these like 007 laser beams, and that there is some food that is 007 kind of going below those. And that's what fasting mimicking is really taking advantage of. And so fasting mimicking specifically will use especially very low, simple sugars and refined carbohydrates that are one of the big triggers to kick us out, but also, interestingly, low in protein as well, and especially animal proteins that have amino acids that really especially kick us out of a fast and put us into growth mode. So those are two of those big triggers, but there are other ones, and believe it or not, caffeine and coffee might be one of them.
Ooh, okay. So real quick, you said when we're talking about like cellular growth or cellular repair, so are we kind of like mentioning like autophagy and kind of the cleaning house of the cells as opposed to like spiking mTOR, for example, and like protein synthesis?
Love it. Okay, we are getting into the stuff that I really like to talk about. I don't always get to. So yeah, but not with all fasts, and that's a really important thing. So for any of your listeners who are not familiar with autophagy, autophagy is the ability of our body to clean house at the cellular level. I like to think of it like a vacuum cleaner for our cells. It does happen at a kind of baseline level all of the time, kind of just scavenging and looking for things that are like really awry, but it never really significantly activates unless we put our body into this deep repair state. And it does turn out it takes enough of this positive stress, or what we call hormetic stress, to really significantly activate it. We're seeing that it actually takes about 3 days or about 72 hours of water only or fasting mimicking diets to turn this on. And then once you do, it's kind of like, I like to think of it like a dimmer switch, but a broken one. So it's like really hard to get up at the beginning. And then all of a sudden you get in and you're like, okay, now we got it. And it starts going up. And that's kind of that same concept of getting to this enough of this positive stress to really activate it. And then it does. And yes, mTOR is part of it. When mTOR is activated, which it is typically activated primarily by amino acids, then it will signal to the body that autophagy should be dampened and that growth should be the focus. And when we don't activate it and we limit the consumption of amino acids that especially trigger mTOR, then our body will shift gears. So mTOR is one of those nutrient sensing pathways or alarm bells or laser beams or whatever the heck you want to call them.
Gotcha. And so Cause yeah, that was like my understanding was like you're suppressing mTOR when you're fasting. And then basically once you eat, like you spike that up and they, they're inversely kind of related to each other. So I found that super interesting though, that there's still food that you can consume and still be in that kind of cellular repair mode, which I think is like where obviously we want the benefits from those. And as well, I've heard like, is this a myth or is this pretty accurate that around what is it, like the 100-hour mark that stem cell production increases at that time?
Yeah, so the stem cell research is still relatively early, especially in humans, right? So we have some pretty decent mice models with stem cell activation where we can start seeing some activation there. But with humans, we're still a little hazy on the exact timeline as to when that would happen. But we do see that with, for example, we just had this really cool study. We were chatting right before about this, and is one of the reason why I love this study is because it's one of the first ones in humans that seems to suggest that we are activating some sort of stem cell, activation here. And it's with that chemosensory ability, the ability to taste and smell. And in this study that used fasting mimicking for 5 days, importantly, 5 days, right? So it's past that 100-hour mark or even that 72-hour mark where we're really starting to see these more significant activations. They were able to show a 6 times better improvement in the ability to taste and smell. And then what they did was they said, okay, well, we know that these people lost a significant amount of weight, which can also improve your ability to taste and smell. So let's account for that. Let's see if there's still results despite the weight loss being part of it. And they did. And so that really leads us to believe that the vast majority of this rejuvenation is likely from that deep cellular cleanup and likely stem cell activation. So while we haven't proven per se that it is stem cell activation, it's very likely the case because you're creating something that was non-functional for a long period of time.
Yeah. And so I've done a couple 3-day fasts and I've done one 5-day fast. And on each of those fasts, typically around day 3, exactly what you said. I feel like I can smell food from like 3 blocks away. When you finally do eat, the food tastes like the most incredible food you've ever tasted. And even I feel like my eyesight is so much better and just focused and dialed in, which, I've heard theories on like maybe this is evolutionary and if you're starving then you need to become like better at foraging or hunting or whatever it might be, and so your senses are more dialed in. But it's 100% because my I would say my palate for taste is not really the best, but yeah, when I'm fasted and I eat whatever, it's usually like fruit or like rice congee or something as my first meal, and it is the best tasting food I've ever had.
Absolutely. I also would, my belief that some of these sense heightening pieces is also caused by you starting to reach peak ketosis at that time too, because the ketones hitting your brain also really help, kind of remove that fog and give you more of this heightened sensation. Not to mention that when we're in this fasted state, we have counter regulatory hormones that go up, like adrenaline and cortisol, which if those are up for a really long period of time, that's a bad thing. But for a short period of time during this fast, it can be really good at heightening our awareness and our senses too. So there's a lot of stuff going on that can make you feel really good, actually, including, I've had a lot of people tell me, man, Renee, I'm sleeping less, but I feel better. I can't believe it. And that's what we believe is coming from something called orexin A being released that allows you to still be really high energy despite a shorter period of sleep, which, as you mentioned, if you think about that evolution wise, of course our body evolved to have that functionality, because when we were starved for food and we had to go find it, we had to be able to sleep less, be more agile, be faster, be stronger so that we could find something.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of going into the different types of fasting. after college, I had put on a little bit of weight, late night studying, all the stuff you shouldn't be doing. And after that is when I first started trying intermittent fasting with like a keto type diet. It wasn't like 100% keto, but lost a ton of weight. And I loved the way I felt when I was, waking up in the morning and just maybe having like some coffee, and that sense of focus and kind of being dialed in was very desirable for me. But long term, I found that I was losing muscle mass with it. And, probably there was definitely things I could have been doing differently, but I've found that doing longer term fasting, but just a few times a year definitely is, I'm finding more benefit in that style of fasting. Although I do miss having that like kind of brain always being kicked on in the morning. I still go for like about a 10 to a 12-hour fast, like between the evening and morning. But a fasting mimicking diet, like what kind of foods can you have on that? And is there still a degree of intermittent fasting in there, or what does that look like?
So with the fasting mimicking diet, there's a bunch of ways that you can do it, but the most common way in terms of timing is going to be a 5-day protocol. You can do fasting mimicking as part of an intermittent daily routine or even 24-hour fasting mimicking protocols, but I'm going to talk about the 5-day. Now, in the 5-day example, you're going to be able to eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, and you don't need it to be within an intermittent fasted window. So you could wake up, have a meal, and then spread it out throughout the day, and then finish your day and have something even right before bed. That would all qualify and still fit within the fasting mimicking diet. And I do know some people that will do it in maybe one or even two meals. That's it, just because that's the way that they prefer to eat. And that's fine too. In all of the studies, they don't specifically require you to have it within any special window of the day. But importantly, especially with the kits that already come made, and certainly even if you're trying to follow your own protocol, you don't want to say, oh, I didn't eat everything that I was supposed to have today. I'm going to just shift it over to the next day. That you don't want to do, because it is, kind of on this, I like to think of it like a 24-hour clock.
Gotcha. Okay. And then in terms of, I'm thinking of, if you were to do a pure fast, what would be the best type of foods to break a fast? Like I always hear fruit is a really good one because it's hydrating, but I've also heard, like I said, like rice, I mentioned rice congee earlier, something very like neutral in flavor. I've heard to stay away from like meat first thing for like the first meal, but do you have, what are the findings, or what do you see as the best kind of food to break a fast with? During my 5-day fast, I was consuming 3 other things besides high quality water, and that was salt, coffee, and tea. Yes, you can consume all 3 of those during a fast. It will not pull you out of your fast because they're low enough in calories. And in fact, they actually can help you during your fast. Now, when it comes to the products that I'm consuming during a fast, I want to make sure that they are of the highest quality possible. And that is why when it came to my coffee, I was going with the Regen Roast coffee from Lineage. This is the best quality coffee here because most coffee has mold and glyphosate in it, because the companies out there are not testing for those things. And let's be honest, they're trying to produce a cheap cup of coffee and fill up their pockets, right? But here at Lineage, they're making sure that they're doing the processes that are necessary to test for things like mold and for glyphosate, to make sure that they're delivering you a very clean, wholesome cup of coffee that tastes delicious. And this has truly been my go-to every morning during this fast to get a nice, refreshing and delicious cup of coffee. It truly has been the best thing in the world. And I will continue to drink this even after I'm done with this fast. But this is the only coffee I'll drink when I'm on a fast. And on top of that, I can't wait to throw in some of the Lineage Nose to Tail Collagen when I am done with this fast. So that'll be coming up next. And if you want to go ahead and try this out, if you want to try the cleanest coffee out there, go ahead and check out Lineage. That is in the description. And as well, of course, you get a discount code for being a listener to the show. Go ahead and check out that coffee. I thought it was delicious. And once again, if you want to put in good quality coffee into your body, that's the one to go to. Go ahead and check them out in the description. And let's get back to the episode. Peace.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, the obvious stuff that you're going to try and avoid: alcohol, refined sugars, even like excess saturated fat or even animal proteins. Yes. Maybe less obvious, but those ones, because your body hasn't had them for, especially for these prolonged fasts, for a while, it can come as a bit of a shock to the system. So those ones, definitely not. In terms of what to have, yes, fruits and vegetables, things like that. Some people do like to start with more liquid, soft foods. So I could see where rice conchi would kind of fit into that, or like maybe like a light, like even like vegetarian chili or something like that would probably okay, as long as it's not super spice forward, because that might just upset your stomach. But you can get away, especially if you're doing fasting mimicking, you can get away with a little bit more. If you're doing water only fasting, then take it easy, gradually reintroduce foods. In terms of the fruits, one thing to be mindful of is to try and choose low glycemic fruits, because if you go heavy in with like tropical fruits, for example, which are higher glycemic, that can actually, even though it's a fruit and it does have fiber, and I'm a big fan of fruit, so I'm not demonizing these fruits, but after a fast, not the best time. So stick to things like berries and apples and things like that that are lower glycemic. And you can Google low glycemic fruits; they're all over the internet.
Yeah. And so as well, for you mentioned earlier that fasting can look differently depending on the stage of life as well. So when we're looking at specifically women here who are in their reproductive years, and then as opposed to like perimenopause and then menopause, how would fasting look different for each of those stages of life? And what are the main focuses when we're thinking of fasting for those stages of life?
So I would say let's just go based off of time. We'll start with our reproductive years. So important thing to keep in mind here is that our cycle may in fact impact the way that our body handles the fast. Unfortunately, we don't really know when the best time is. Some people will argue that your follicular phase, or the first half of the cycle, is better because of the ratio of progesterone and estrogen, where we are a little bit more estrogen dominant, meaning that our body might be happier in a ketogenic phase. So there's arguments there based off of some decent physiology facts that we do know to be true. But then the people that are going to argue for the luteal phase also have some really good evidence on their side, being that during that follicular phase, your body is gearing up to produce and to ovulate, and that, if you, especially if you're looking to support pregnancy, you want to make sure you have a really good strong egg, and fasting right before that might impact that. It might cause your body to say, oh no, we're in a fast, we're not ready, this is not a good time for reproduction. And even if you don't care about pregnancy, having a healthy cycle is still important. So these are the arguments on both sides. I share that because they both are valid, and we don't really have a lot of data to support either one in terms of actually doing a study where we put women in the follicular versus luteal phase head to head and see who has a better cycle longer term. Possibly we can measure all sorts of things, but this just hasn't been done. So what I tell my female clients that are in their reproductive years is you can do an N of 1 yourself as a test subject. This isn't life or death. If you get it wrong, it's not, it's you'll recover, everything will be fine. But listen to your body and try one or the other, whichever one kind of sounds better to you, and then see which one you are more comfortable with. You'll know. You'll tell that you'll be able to tell the difference. Which one is more comfortable for you? Which one are you maybe less hungry with? Which one do you notice your cycle wasn't interrupted? Those are all things that you might want to look for. And then once you find the right fit for you, stick with it until we get more data, which I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Okay, now we're going to jump ahead a little bit, and we're going to go into perimenopause. And here, while estrogen is declining and other hormones are declining over time, we want to be especially mindful of any nutrition protocol that we do and make sure that we are protecting our muscle. And that's because as we start entering into this phase of life, our muscle starts declining more rapidly, especially if we're not doing anything to protect it or to build it. And so there's also this, because we are losing our muscle, which drops our metabolic rate, the same exercise and the same nutrition programs that we were doing before are not going to be doing the same today as they were, even like months before, right? It's going to have a different impact. And so there's this natural inclination when we start seeing the weight go up or our body composition change to go, oh man, I got to go on a diet. But we have to resist this urge of just, reducing calories across the board or going on, a very serious, restrictive diet for too long, because we can run the risk of tapping into muscle, or God forbid, the GLP-1s that are really tapping into muscle. So you want to make sure that whatever you choose is highly muscle protective. That's why I'm a big fan of the fasting mimicking diet, because of that muscle protection. You also will see that because estrogen is dropping, your insulin sensitivity will unfortunately decline. You'll become more insulin resistant. So you want to make sure that you choose protocols that are really good for improving the way that your body handles blood sugar. And again, I'm a big fan of the fasting mimicking diet for that reason. It's really good for that. Other other diets that can be helpful with that might be the ketogenic diet. But if you're doing that, it's so hard to get a good ketogenic diet that is also highly plant-based, and that it's really, really hard, which is why I just think that doing periodic fasting mimicking is, in my opinion, easier. So those are kind of my two big areas there, not to mention that with fasting mimicking, again, I kind of mentioned this earlier, is just less of a stress on the body when your body's already going through a stress, and just even emotionally the stress that all of these changes are inducing. Now, menopause, honestly, once we reach menopause, there's less fluctuations, there's less changes. So there's a lot more flexibility around this time. We still have to be worried about muscle protection, but now really the biggest things that we're worried about is aging. Aging is the biggest risk factor for all of the top chronic diseases out there. It's, really, it's kind of this underrated problem, probably because there's nothing that we can necessarily do to change the number in our birth certificate, right? But there is something that we can change, and that is our biological age, or the way that our body behaves, right? And so fasting mimicking, I will always come back to this. Fasting mimicking has a really cool study that came out in 2024, published in Nature, showing that biological age decreased 2.5 years with just 3 cycles of the fasting mimicking diet on average, to the point where we're seeing that if you were to do this 3 times a year for a period of 20 years, this study was looking at individuals, I think from the age of 50 to 70, and they showed that the biological age would decrease 11 years if you were to do that over that period of time. So these are no small numbers. This is really, really quite impactful. And just as a little fun aside, I've walked thousands of people through fasting mimicking diets, and I've seen all sorts of incredible results. And while this is not common by any means, I have even had women who have been in menopause for a period of time tell me, Renee, I just got my cycle back. And that to me, again, is just some of these nuggets of us being able to see that rejuvenation at the cellular level happening, and that kind of we really avoid saying reverse aging, because you can't reverse aging. We are that is where we are, but we can change our biological age. So, I think it's really incredible what we can see. Okay, I'm done talking.
No, I please continue. It's super incredible to hear this. Reversing well, all right, reducing the biological age or whatever you want to call it, is truly incredible. And when we're talking about literally just doing three of these, fasting mimicking diet phases a year, that those are 5-day like periods, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it.
Like a minimal amount of time right there. So sorry, and then when we're focusing more on muscle maintenance in the later years for women, so does that mean like during? Sorry, you mentioned with fasting mimicking dieting that did you mention that there is protein in there or not because it spikes like the things like mTOR or for example too high?
It's a great question. There is some protein in the fasting mimicking diet, but it is very, very limited. I would say in an already calorie limited program, it's only about 5 to 10% of your total calories. So, that's very low. And this is by design. But I like to remind people that you are doing this ideally like max 20 days a year. Some individuals, if we're doing this for diabetes remission, they will do this probably like 8 times in the year. But that would be until they get their diabetes into remission. And then they would do only 15 to 20 days a year again. So the vast majority of people are only doing this very infrequently. And outside of that, you're going back to an adequate amount of daily protein. And your body is really, really incredible that even though the protein is very reduced during this 5-day program by design, it is going to protect itself for those 5 days. Now, if you were to continue for a significantly longer period of time, there is a chance that you would tap into more muscle more significantly. But for these short 5-day periods, we see really incredible muscle protection.
That's awesome. That is very cool to see with doing fasting because I feel like that's one of the biggest things with doing, especially long term fasting, is always like the muscle maintenance. But yeah, sorry, and I was like going on an aside there because I like too many questions are coming up at once for me. But yeah, and then it makes sense as well that you would then just focus heavily on the like ingesting enough protein like outside of the fasting or the fasting diet window. Yeah, that's incredible. I know I haven't done a fast in a while here, so I need to pick one up.
You're gonna do a fasting mimicking diet. I can tell it's coming.
Yeah.
It really is truly, not only does it have incredible results, but it's also easier. And so it makes it, I think for a lot of people, it sounds like it's been a while since you've done your last one because you don't look forward to them. You're not super excited about doing your next 5-day fast, right? And I've been doing this now for like 7 years, maybe more now. And I've done now about 15 fasts. So, you're pretty, it's a lot easier to stay on track and to look forward to your next one when they're not so painful.
Yeah, for sure. And then as well, I love the benefits of it. Like one of the biggest things for me is always with my digestion. I feel after, especially an extended fast, like it feels like a digestive reset for me personally. And you're just solid for like weeks, you're feeling great. So that's one of the biggest differences I notice personally. But what are you seeing with a lot of the people you work with in terms of the benefits in doing these fasts or the fasting mimicking diet? Sorry.
Oh, so many benefits. So many benefits. I'm going to touch on this digestive piece only because that's where you started. But there's a lot because there's now over 40 clinical trials with fasting mimicking alone. And then you can imagine a lot more with fasting. But what we see in terms of digestion and GI support, we've got preclinical trials. Granted, these are done in mice, so we have to be careful about how much we liberalize these results to humans. But we see that in these IBD models, people with inflammatory bowel disease, this is very significant GI inflammation and dysfunction. So with these models where they did the fasting mimicking diet, they showed that not only had they improved the composition of the microbiome. So there was improvements in lactobacteria and bifidobacteria, which we consider to be good bacteria, but they also saw regeneration of the gut lining. And so this is again that activation, very likely in this case, of stem cells and rebuilding that we see for your gut. And what's really cool about that study too is that in that study they not only did fasting mimicking, but they also did water only fasting in those models. They were able to show that the fasting mimicking had even better results, and that's because there's these periods of refeeding and there's the inclusion of fiber and there's all this extra stuff that helps with the rebuilding and the protection. So I thought that that's one of my favorite studies there. Now, I mentioned there's 40 clinical trials, so I'm just gonna scratch the surface here. But of course, we see really good results with weight loss, but importantly, the right kind of weight loss. This is especially in the trunk region or our belly fat, the more dangerous fat, the visceral fat, the stuff that's around our organs. I already mentioned that it's muscle protective. So this is really good body composition attack, which in a good way. Now, we also see improvements in metabolic health. So pretty much anything that your doctor is typically measuring when you go in, your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your HbA1c, your blood sugar metrics. Now we are starting to see some doctors measure insulin resistance through HOMA-IR and things like that. All of these things that your doctor is looking at, there's been some significant improvement even in healthy individuals. But where it's really cool to see is in people where it is become more pronounced, for example, with type 2 diabetes, where we're seeing patients with type 2 diabetes going into remission, getting off of medications, dropping their A1C to even below pre-diabetes levels, right? So into true remission. So this is really incredible in terms of what it can do for your metabolic health, and considering the fact that 93% of Americans are considered metabolically unhealthy, this is very important. What else? Skin health. There's really cool studies on skin health showing improvements in skin texture, fine lines, hydration. There's results talking about, obviously, we talked about biological age. We also see, we are now coming out with a study showing that autophagy is in fact occurring, which is really hard to measure, which is why not a lot of companies are doing that. But importantly, the companies that are working around fasting mimicking are, man, there's so much. I mean, in preclinical stuff, which we have to be careful of, but I'll just kind of name a couple of areas that there's a lot of research. Oncology and cancer, autoimmune health, so things like multiple sclerosis, type 1 diabetes, IBD I mentioned. We also see some cool research in Alzheimer's now coming out. So yeah, so much.
I mean, literally everything, basically. I do have an area that I have been focusing on here recently for myself personally, which is the liver. I feel like it's almost like the unsung hero of so much stuff in the body. Have you seen any specific benefits in fasting or fasting mimicking diets with liver and liver health?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggest problems right now with liver health is actually hepatic fat or liver fat. This is where we're seeing a really big epidemic of people who even look thin but have fatty liver. And we showed through DEXA analysis and MRIs where we can look at where the fat is located. And we were able to show that in individuals that had a highest fat fraction, so of the group, they had the most amount of hepatic fat, they showed a 50% reduction in their liver fat with just 4 cycles of the fasting mimicking
Oh
diet.
my gosh.
Yeah, this is the hardest fat to tap into. So when people say, "Oh, I lost 5 pounds" or whatever, well, I would ask you, where did you lose those 5 pounds from? And most of the time you're losing it as high as 40% from muscle, and that's a huge problem. And then the rest of it is probably subcutaneous fat. If not, some of that weight is probably also just like water weight and things like that. But very, very, very hard to tap into visceral fat. It really doesn't like disappearing. So when you see that a solution is able to decrease hepatic fat by 50%, this is no joke. And even in the group that didn't have the highest liver fats, they still saw reduction. It's just what's really cool about fasting and fasting mimicking is that the body really is so intelligent, and when it goes into this repair mode, it hunts down where it needs to be working the most. So, even in people that don't have a lot of weight to lose, we don't see a lot of weight loss. In people that do have a lot of weight to lose, we see a lot of weight loss. In people that have high HbA1c or poor blood glucose management, we see that it stays relatively at this healthy level, whereas those that are elevated, it drops. Same with blood pressure, same with cholesterol. It's so cool. At how the body, if you just kind of get out of the way and let it do its magic, is able to do the work in the right place.
Yeah, it really is a fascinating thing, the innate intelligence of the body at like a cellular level. I always think about this in terms of like, oh, I need to take this supplement, I need to do this, I need to do that, and then yet when you just take everything away and you fast, or you do a fasting mimicking diet, it really is like your body is just so smart. I mean, it literally can create an entire human. Like, it's obviously so smart, and you do no, I mean, aside from obviously the action of it, but like beyond that, it is essentially just your body taking over and doing everything that needs to be done. So it's wild how much intelligence is within the body. But I always wonder, like, I have my ideas and a lot of them are like evolution based, but why do you think it is that fasting is so beneficial when it's like you're literally taking everything away?
Well, I agree. I do believe strongly in kind of this evolutionary explanation, which is that we didn't always have food around, and our body had to figure out, okay, if I'm not in this state of growth, if I can't focus on reproduction, I need to get myself to a place where I can reproduce down the line. The only way I can do that is through keeping myself as healthy as possible. And the bodies that were able to do that are the ones that survived. And so we, over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and possibly even before, our bodies evolved to have these mechanisms to go into these repair states. And the unfortunate part of it all is that we're now in a place where we can't take advantage of these things because we have food all around us all the time. And when I say we can't, I mean we often don't. We certainly can, we just don't. And it's not this force of nature that forces us to kind of go back and forth between feasting and fasting. So we have to do it ourselves, and we have to set ourselves some reminders in our calendar. Oh, yeah, it's time for my 5-day fast.
Yeah, and so I mean, obviously, you have me intrigued here with a fasting mimicking diet because I've never tried it before. So, for me, what would be like at least like a general overview? Like, I want to go do a fasting mimicking diet, I don't know, tomorrow. What would I be looking to do it? Like, how would my schedule kind of look? Yeah, and like, is there just like a general overview of like foods to include, foods to not include kind of deal? And then beyond that, how can everyone else who is interested in trying out a fasting mimicking diet for their specific stage of life, how would they get started with that?
Absolutely. Well, I am highly partial to the ready to go kits that arrive at your door. Everything is packaged up for you to go through this 5-day fast. I recommend these for more than just simplicity, but also because all of the research that I have talked about today is based off of the company that has now made it readily available to ship to your door. There's 2 companies that are doing it right now. One is ProLon and the other one is called L-Nutra Health. So I lean on those heavily with anybody who asks me how to do fasting mimicking, because it takes all the guesswork out and you don't run the risk. Those alarm bells on the cellular service, they're really picky. If you go over that threshold, it's done. You're getting kicked out of that fast. So I don't like anybody to risk it. I want to go with where the evidence is. Now, that being said, yes, there is kind of some guidelines. Dr. Walter Longo, who's the father of fasting mimicking, in his book, The Longevity Diet, outlines kind of some general recommendations on how you might move forward. But again, I very strongly recommend that you stick to the way that it is defined in these 5-day kits. And what you will get in those are very thoughtfully and scientifically designed, with breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack, and even a dessert at the end of the day. You usually will start with a nut-based bar, then you'll transition to a snack. It might be things like crackers, and these are nut-based, seed-based. There's even kale in these crackers, but not your typical like grain crackers. You'll also then do a lunch. It's usually going to be a plant-based soup, something like minestrone or tomato or broccoli quinoa. There's tons of cool flavors. There's at this point now, I think there's like 20 different flavors of soups that you can go through. Then you'll have another snack, and then you'll have your dinner, which will be another plant-based soup, and then you'll have your evening chocolate sweet, which, that's like a full day of food. There is one thing that gets added on days 2 through 5, and that is something called the L drink. This is important. It is a glycerol-based beverage, and it is added to help support with muscle protection. So glycerol is not really used by our body when we're outside of a fasted state, because it takes a lot of work for our body to turn that into glucose in a way that will actually be useful. So it usually just doesn't do much with it. But when we're in a fasted state, it's like, okay, I'm willing to do the work. I'll bite, and it'll run it through the gluconeogenesis pathway, spit out some glucose. And that is a really nice way for these kits to personalize based off of weight, so that you and I don't necessarily have the exact same kit. Depending on weight, you'll put more or less of that L drink in to give you a little bit more or less of that glucose that will just be produced by your body if needed.
That's super cool. Like having it come in a kit is super handy, and it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. Cause I know one of the things about a fast that I actually enjoy is when you are fasting, you don't cook, obviously, and you don't clean. And then you realize how much of your day is consumed in thinking of what you're going to eat, preparing it, like getting all the ingredients, blah, blah, like thing after thing after thing. So the fact that it can just be all set and ready to go for you is amazing. That's really cool. And mention the two companies again. I know we'll have it in the show notes, but what was the company again?
Yeah, I'll mention both, and I'll explain where I would recommend you go depending on who you are, because they are different. So individuals who care about longevity, optimization, maybe you just want to lose a couple pounds, prevention, things like that, go to ProLon. ProLon is they'll get you the 5-day fasting mimicking kit, ship it to your door, super simple, easy, and then they'll kind of get out of your hair. If you're interested in learning more about that company, their website is ProLon Life. That's PROLON life.com. Now, if you're interested in doing fasting mimicking because your doctor has told you, oh, I'm seeing your blood pressure is starting to increase, you have type 2 diabetes, your cholesterol is getting out of whack, any of these metabolic health concerns, or you have a significant amount of weight to lose, or you just want added support through this protocol, then L-Nutra Health is going to be your best friend. They not only include a fasting mimicking diet that is specifically designed for metabolic health needs, but they also will add in dietitian visits twice a month, physician visits as needed, lab work, medication management, all of the extra bells and whistles to make it super seamless. And There are programs as short as 1 month, as high as 12 months that you can choose from. And even in the 12-month program, at the 12-month mark, there is 75% adherence. This is, in the world of nutrition support, again, very unheard of, that somebody would stick to something for that long. And that's because there is so much support and incredible results. So if that's of interest to you, check out L-Nutra Health.com. That's L-Nutra Health.com.
Gotcha. And you mentioned as well that there's like, tests that you can do. And I know depending on what you want to test for, it's going to vary. But is there a general, like, even at home test, I guess, that you would recommend for someone who just wants to track at least some of the major results of what happened during their fasting mimicking diet?
Totally. Yes. So there's some fun stuff that I would recommend. I recommend before you start. So first, actually, let me talk about what the recommended protocol is, which if you've never done fasting mimicking diet before, even if you're healthy, the recommendation is to do it once a month for 3 months in a row. And then once you've done that, to transition to quarterly. So once every 3 to 4 months from there, for the average person. Some people do more, some people do less. Now, so if you're doing that initial 3, before you start the initial 3, then I would just go to your doctor and get kind of your basic blood panel, something called a CMP. You could do even the CBP, but the CMP is the more important one here, complete metabolic panel. That'll cover a lot of ground. You can ask for that HOMA-IR insulin resistance test. You can ask for a CRP or HSCRP specifically. That'll measure inflammation. What else is a good one? If you can do any body composition testing, even if it's an in-body, it's not the most specific test that you can do, or accurate test, I should say. But if you can get your hands on a DEXA scan, do that. But you can. There's a lot that you can do, but I think that those are probably the big ones. Then do your 3, and then don't. It's very tempting to, the day you're done your 3rd cycle, to go in and get your lab tested because you think that's going to be the best day. But I urge people, wait 3 to 5 days at least, and then test then, because your body, when it goes into a fasted state, it's got all these things changing, and you can actually see some things look a little bit strange if you test right when you're done. So wait 3 to 5 days and then test, and you will see. Come back to me and share with me your results, and you can thank me later.
Yeah, no, I love that. And as well, because I have my obsession with the liver and liver health, are there specific tests, like for example, with when we're looking at like the like fatty liver and all that, are there specific tests that you would recommend to test before and after the fasting mimicking diets for that?
That's a good question. So there are obviously liver tests that you can do, like AST, ALT, etc. I haven't actually seen any clinical data on how that might change. Now, what we have seen in terms of that hepatic fat, certainly a change, which if you were to do a DEXA, they might be able to give you some information on where the fat is located. Sometimes you need to go a level up from that. But yeah, I would say probably you could get pretty far with at least a DEXA in terms of that body composition and visceral fat. I'm not sure if they're going all the way deep into specifically targeting the liver, but they might, especially some of the new ones.
Gotcha. Well, I know we're coming close to the end here. I can keep you for hours and hours just chatting about this. I love the topic of fasting, but I really appreciate the vantage point you're bringing to this conversation, because prior to this, like I said, it was a very black and white kind of deal for me. It was like, you're fasting or you're not fasting. And when I think of a lot of people in my life, specifically like my mom, for example, she's hopefully not listening to this episode, but she's a big crash dieter, and I work so hard with her to try to just clean up her diet and really, just focus on her health. And I know one thing for her though is if she can see like a program where, hey, like this gets shipped to your house and like all you have to do is follow this, and it's so impactful. Because I know I can at best get her to do like a 10-hour fast maximum. So I think this is just right up her alley, and I'm not to like pick on my mom, 'cause obviously I love her so much, but it really is something that I think a lot of people face that issue, right? Like there's a lot of people who have never fasted before. There's a lot of people who have never even tried to alter their diet. They just kind of eat what they have or have access to. Totally makes sense. But I think when you know better, you can do better. And if you have a tool that makes it so much easier to do something that honestly is quite difficult, and I will say sometimes I like the difficult. I don't know, maybe maybe I want like the pain. I don't know, but it's it does. I feel like I get some mental fortitude, but at the same time, I just want to be able to do a fast and not have to like literally I've woken up from a nightmare that I broke my fast eating on like day 2. So yeah, if I can bypass that, that'd be great.
Absolutely. I mean, masochist or not, your body does also feel that stress and that difficulty. And if you can limit that a little bit, I think it goes a long way. So, I mean, I will always pick an FMD over a water only fast. But for some people, sure, if you can do it and that's what makes you feel good. And for some people, I've even heard some people tell me that they think that water fasting is easier. Just because they can just stick to that. So everybody is different. And I think that is a resounding truth across all of nutrition, really across all of medicine and health. And so find what works for you and then stick with that. So
See, Renee, I knew there was a reason I liked you. That's beautifully put, and I love it when it's not just a full-on dogmatic approach. Like when you can recognize that every individual is different. I love that. So, Renee, if you're open to it, I'll probably bring you back on the show. But on that note, we are coming to a conclusion. So I do like to open the floor here, so you can just share any last final thoughts with the listeners, or as well, just let people know where they can connect with you. If you want to mention the websites again, and of course, I will have that all in the description. So feel free to take the floor.
absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This has been super fun for me. I absolutely will be back. And maybe I'll just finish by saying that this is really just the tip of the iceberg. We talked a lot about fasting mimicking, and even that, we're probably just at the tip of the iceberg of some of the things that we can talk about. But I myself, I'm a longevity dietitian. I got my master's degree in one of the only health span nutrition masters that there are in existence today. And this is really just one piece of a very larger puzzle that is longevity. You kind of just level up from, okay, fasting mimicking. Okay, now meal timing, that's a whole separate world. And then you talk about nutrition, which covers a way bigger ground. And then, okay, wow, well, what about sleep and exercise and community and stress and all of these other pieces that fall into this bigger puzzle that is longevity. So what I guess I will finish off by saying is that even if this didn't hit home for you and fasting mimicking isn't for you right now, find something that is, because any change that you make will inevitably kind of prompt you to do the next thing that will make you feel better and stronger. So any step in the right direction is a step that I will applaud. And if you have any questions about those things, please do come and find me. You can find me on Instagram at Fitton Nutrition. That's Fitton Nutrition. That's probably the fastest way to reach me. I also have a website, fittonnutrition.com. If you are interested in learning more about fasting mimicking, specifically from those two companies, ProLon Life, that's that longevity prevention side. That's PROLON life.com. And then the L-Nutra Health side, which is that more medical division, metabolic health support, that is L-Nutra health.com. Incredible resources on both of the sites. Lots of the science that I shared today are going to be on there too. Cool resources, cool blogs, and lots of support. So check it out.
Awesome, Renee. Once again, thank you so much. And yeah, to all the listeners, I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you on the next one, and part 2 with Renee whenever that comes up. We'll keep you posted. But all right, everybody, have a beautiful day. Peace.